Greetings and welcome to the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University. My name is Peter Mandeville, and I'm a senior research fellow at the center. Here at Georgetown, I lead the Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power project, a multi-year research initiative enabled by the generous support of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, dedicated to exploring and understanding the various ways that religion fits into the foreign policy and external relations of states and governments around the world. We are delighted to welcome to the Berkeley Center Dr. Erdi Öztürk of London Metropolitan University and Dr. Nukhet Sandal from Ohio University. Today, I will have the distinct pleasure of moderating a discussion between the two of them organized around Dr. Öztürk's brand new book, Religion, Identity, and Power, Turkey and the Balkans in the 21st Century, which has just appeared last month, in fact, in the Edinburgh Studies in Modern Turkey series from Edinburgh University Press. This book is a fascinating study of how Turkey has mobilized dimensions of ethnic and religious identity as a political strategy in its engagement with Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Albania over the past 2 decades of the AK Party's political dominance. And I can't think of anyone better than Dr. Sandal to help us contextualize the implications and significance of this work, since she herself is both intimately familiar with the Turkish case, as well as being a leading scholar on the intersection of religion, conflict, and international relations more generally. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read out Dr. Öztürk and Dr. Sandal's full bios, but rather, once we get started, I will put some links in the chat box that you can click on in order to peruse their full and very impressive online profiles. I will also include a few links to recent publications by our speakers, including a piece that Dr. Öztürk has contributed to our Geopolitics of Religious Soft Power project here at the Berkeley Center. Finally, just a few brief words about logistics and format for today. I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that today's session is going to be recorded for the benefit of people who weren't able to join us for the live session. All of you who have registered for the event will receive a link to that recording once it goes live. We're going to start by hearing presentations of 15 to 20 minutes from each of our speakers, and then we'll move on to a question and answer and discussion section, which I will moderate. You can participate in that by using the Q&A control on your Zoom control panel. You can click on that to open a chat box or to open a box that you can use to type in any question you have for our speakers. And you can do that at any time during the event today. And I will choose a selection of those questions and comments to put to our speakers. So without further ado, let me go ahead and hand things over to Erdi to kick us off and to also begin by congratulating him on the publication of his new book.
Thank you so much, Peter. I mean, it's great honor, to be in the, at least virtually in the Berkeley Center and to be your host. And also today is a very special day for me because both of you, Nukhet and you, are very special for me and for my academic career, and particularly for the journey of that brand new book. I mean, today, if I know a little bit about religion and international relations theories, this is most probably because of Nukhet's and Jonathan's 2013 book, Religion and International Relations Theory, Interactions and Possibilities. I mean, this is a book which traveled with me more than 15 countries. And Peter, I used your work, namely Global Political Islam, to understand the role of Islam in global politics. And throughout this book, there are lots of references to you. And after you invited me in your project regarding religious soft power, I found the key concept of the book, the ambivalence of religious soft power. So, I mean, now I will discuss this book with you, and therefore I would like to thank both of you for your support, for your contribution to my academic career and the field of religion and global politics. And I really hope I can find different and various opportunities to work both of you again. If I will speak about this book, I mean, actually, this book is a little bit of a product of a personal experience, or I would say that it's a kind of a twist of fate. After many personal issues, I started to live in Ljubljana in the capital of Slovenia, in late 2014, and this story has begun actually. Even though it is hard to consider Ljubljana as a classical Balkan capital, you can smell and you can taste every single taste of the Balkans thanks to the migrants from Bosnia, Serbia, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, Kosovo, and Albania. And I realized that I mean, these migrants have been following Turkish news, politics, culture very closely, and they have different and variable feelings about Turkey and the Turkish politics. But they commonly underline one particular point, I think, which is regarding Turkey's very influential, multidimensional roles in the region. And actually, most of them told me that Turkey is back. But the ways of being back was very diverse for them, and this was a very similar repetitive arguments for all around the Balkans. And so this book, after that sentences, I realized that someone needs to scrutinize that back issue. And this book, therefore, is an output of a researcher's journey in the Balkans. And I would easily say that this is not only a political science and international relations book, this has a interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary dimensions, which has been standing on the intersectionality of history, sociology, anthropology, and this is mostly because of the long and intense fieldwork, participant observation, and my personal life experience in the regions. For that book, I lived in the region more than 3 years, and I conducted more than 130 elite interviews for that book, and beyond that, I told like every single person I found in the streets of the Balkan. So the argument, the Turkey is back argument, is very diverse among ordinary people, but at the same time, it is very diverse among the semi-academic and the academic circles. Some claim that the policies of the successive Justice and Development Party, AKP governments, and the political strategies of the indisputable leader, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, concerning the Balkan region have long been energized by Turkey's desire to reestablish political, economic, religious, and cultural hegemony in the region through various quote-unquote neo-imperialist and neo-colonialist projects. And this is a kind of a reburning of the multi-phases of the Ottoman legacy. But on the other hand, in the other side of the coin, others argue that Turkey and the Balkans have reached the peak point of their mutual beneficial relations, economic enlargements, and proactive utilization of the transnational state apparatus on Turkey. With these two claims, I say many other arguments regarding religion, instrumentalization of religion, power, and interest-based political moves. And therefore, within these two different camps, in my book, I scrutinize Turkey's increasing involvement, activisms, seeking to uncover the role of religion and power-oriented identity reflections in the Balkans, mostly in the 21st century. My study eliminates these aspects of Turkey's relations with its Balkan neighbors in the context of a broader shift in domestic politics and foreign policy under the very changeable phases of the Justice and Development Party period, or I would say that regime. I think this transformation is a transformation from a secular realist orientation of a foreign policy to an adventurous and an ambivalent one to using the ethno-nationalist coercive sonification of the state identity. I think this ethno-nationalist coercive sonification explains the complex relations between religion, state identity, and power in Turkey, because the religion, state identity, and sonification reflect on state power resources in very various ways and the complicated styles. Also, my study, argue that Turkey's increasing repressive, or I would easily say that authoritarian, reactive domestic politics, and very reactive foreign policy, and overtly using Islam-based discourse cannot simply explain as a soft power, but on the contrary, it should be defined as an ambivalence of religious soft power, because this is not directly a hard power as well. As I said, to analyze all of these arguments, to reach all of these arguments, I lived between 2015 and 2019 in the Balkans, and I conducted many different interviews, not only within these three country cases, Republic of Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Albania. And also I traveled a lot throughout the Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, and Montenegro. But beyond that, I mean, I would like to underline one point. This book is not a purely Turkey study book. This book is not only purely a Balkan book. As Jonathan Fox underlines in his very generous endorsement, this book is, I think it's beyond the borders of Turkey and the Balkans. It's very much related with the complicated relations between religion, power, ethnicity, and state identity. So in this context, what I'm arguing in this book as a theoretical argument, actually, as an instinct and one of the oldest part of an identity, religion has a certain and a very significant capacity to shape politics and power relations, as well as state identities. Therefore, religion and religion-oriented power struggles, to the extent that it forms from a part of a state identity, therefore it can shape domestic politics and foreign policy, even if the actors and the decision makers are themselves secular. So in the book, I argued that the establishment and the transformation process of a state identity start from a domestic level via both leadership and the effects of some of the critical junctions, which is very related with one of our currently joint papers with NUCET. And these critical junctions affect the domestic political struggles among different ideological camps. And countries therefore have multi-faced, multi-layered identities, and some of which have a direct or an indirect relation with religion. And these different relations with religion could be seen as among the identity determinants of many different states. Indeed, this argument can be very applicable for Europe. You can find many different examples from the history of the United Kingdom, Latin American countries, even for the United States. But I choose Turkey as a country case. This is not because I'm from Turkey, but the relation between the role of religion in the Turkey's state structure, society, and history is very sui generis. I don't want to speak that much about the Turkey's management of religion, but Turkey has its own laic state identity, but this laicity is not related between the separation between mosque and state affairs. It is very much related how state will control, manage, and regulate religion affairs and use it into the domestic politics and foreign policy at the same time. And this management of religion, on the one hand, methodologically is still same. It has reached a huge transformation throughout the contemporary Turkey's history. And at the end of the day, as of today, Turkey, like many other countries all around the world, is gradually withdrawing from an international cooperation, and it is restoring to a new distinction between civilization, Western understanding of civilization, by synthesizing very subjective understanding of nationalism with a nostalgic vision of history, memory, and religion. This transformation has been going on under the control of Erdogan, and this is, I think, an important point, his unofficial coalition partners, such as Islamist, nationalist, and very newly Eurasianist. And finding ourselves, it's a kind of the non-Westernization process or the Europeanization process. Even though, I mean, after this view, some underline that Turkey has been getting stronger, independent, and being a big game changer while increasingly addressing a global audience and the global ummah. But in the book, I'm rejecting this classical idea, because this idea for me is not giving the full photo. For me, from my reading, from my understanding, the transformation of Turkey's state identity under Erdogan rule have been undoubtedly creating a jargoning effect, and the religion has been playing a not only a single dominant actor, but playing a very dominant role within this process. And it is obvious that Turkish case and the reconciliation and the instrumentalization of one particular understanding of Sunni Islam and Turkish nationalism with Erdogan's current right-wing populism and not reactive, not proactive, but aggressive foreign policy strategies have creating various tensions with other countries. What I also, as a last point, what I underlined that Turkey has been going through a coercive ethno-nationalist Sunnification transformation of the state identity, but also I noted that this kind of dramatic transformation is not happening for the first time of the Ottoman Turkish history. And it is likely that the cards may be reshuffled sooner or later. Within these circumstances, I try to take the photo of all of these transformations, reflections to the Balkans, and using 3 country cases, as I said, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Albania. This is one of the classical questions when I'm talking about the book. Why did you choose that country cases? I mean, there is one simple answer of that. I mean, I can easily choose Bosnia, I can easily choose Serbia, but it would be very difficult and quite impossible for one particular study to cover all the Balkan regions. But I would like to read one quote from the book, if you don't mind. The book is the synthesis of the Mikhail Ivanov, who is one of the chief advisors of the minority rights to Bulgarian President Celal Celalev, and who signed the agreement of Turkey's transnational state apparatus Diyanet's acceptance to the Bulgaria. His quote notes that we invited Turkey's Diyanet because of its secular/laic mentality. We know that only a laic and a modern Muslim majority country can take care of our Muslims. If we didn't invite Turkey in the first place, most of the fundamentalist and the extremist groups could affect our Muslim community. But now we've been seeing that Turkey has been changing dramatically. These 3 countries invited Turkey in the beginning of 1990s because of Turkey's secular laic state structure and identity. This means that even though Turkey has official representations like embassies in all the Balkan countries, only these 3 country cases had some like certain identity acceptance regarding Turkey. So what has changed since the beginning of 1990s to the first quarter of 2021? This book scrutinized that issues while scrutinizing these 3 country cases. And also these 3 countries is in terms of demography, in terms of religion and state relations, their relation with the European Union, their economy, their population, their history. They're giving a different kind of photo to us. What I found after 4 years fieldwork within these countries, I found 4 essential points which are quite related with religion, identity, and power transformation of Turkey. The first point is service to the global ummah. Despite all the activities, when we look at the investment of Turkey and how these economic investments are perceived by the local elites of the Balkans, the Justice and Development Party has realized that Turkey's classical Western-oriented foreign policy has not been serving the new interests of Turkey. And so the new regime aims to establish deeper relations with the Balkan countries, but particularly with the Muslims of these countries. Turkey has in fact been preferring to serve the Ummah instead of expanding relations with all the components of the Balkans in spite of the fragile economic conditions. So this is also related to Turkey's domestic politics. This is also very much related with Turkey's regional politics in the Balkans, but also this is a kind of a reflection of Turkey's, which has been in a revival with the other Muslim majority countries like Saudi Arabia, like United Arab Emirates, who are going to be the leader of the global ummah. Indeed, this kind of a policy transformations getting different reactions. Most probably, mostly some of the lower middle class and the lower class Muslim components of the Balkans are very pleased to all of these investments. But on the other hand, non-Muslims are being looking very suspicious of the new Turkey's new investments. The second thing is that all of the Turkey's religion, power, and identity, and also and also interest-oriented internal conflicts has been one way or another exporting to the Balkans. I'm talking about the famous war between the Gülen movement and the Justice and Development Party. Within this war, even though maybe one can easily argue that the war is over in Turkey, but I'm insisting that it is still alive in the Balkans and has been a big indicator to understand Turkey's current situation in the Balkans. And within this conflict, religion, religious apparatus, and the religion-oriented policies has been playing a huge effect. But all of these exportation of domestic conflicts via transnational religious apparatus or using religion as a tool has been creating a security problem in the Balkans. The third part is that it is about the interfering the internal affairs of the countries. Turkey, as seeing itself as the big brother, big sibling in the Balkans, and the new foreign policy approach, Turkey creating not only a kind of a neo-Ottomanism, but also using different pillars, Sunni Islam, Turkishness, and supporting some of the Muslim components, Muslim political leaders, Muslim political groups and the parties directly and indirectly, using again religious discourse, claiming that Turkey is the big brother and the religious leader of the region. And this has been creating some of the domestic political problems in the Balkans. And this has been creating a kind of a sovereignty issue for the Balkan elites. The last part is about the instrumentalization of Sunni Islam and nationalism of Erdogan with right-wing populism and aggressive foreign policy strategies. Many elites in the region think that most of Turkey is particularly using overdose of religion activities might de-establish very fragile secular environments of the Balkans. As we know from the history of the Balkans, the societies are linking each other in a very weak ties, and every kind of destabilization will create a problem. So after these points, as a conclusion, what I found that using religion, using it under the name of the soft power is something problematic when we scrutinize the case of Turkey in the Balkans. What I'm trying to say that the phenomenon known as a religious soft power doesn't and cannot remain soft to the extent necessary, or it is intent to be present when states pursue in the issues because of the state configurations, employs economic and other sanctions. So therefore, it is very hard for us to say Turkey is a unique, pure soft power in the Balkans. If one would like to define Turkey's transformation and this transformation reflections to the Balkans, it would be better to define Turkey as an ambivalent soft power. And within this ambivalence, I'm rejecting the idea that Turkey is one of the most welcoming actor in the Balkans, or Turkey is a very annoying actor in the Balkans. The reactions, the findings, the perceptions against the Turkey is very diverse. Still, Erdogan's and the current Turkey's policies has a very good answer within the region, but at the same time, there are some issues regarding to the serving only Ummah, regarding sovereignty, destabilizing the security environment, and also exportation of domestic conflicts via transnational state apparatus. I can at least state these points to enduring my fieldwork and my book, and I'm sure I think after Nükhet's comments and the remarks, I will clarify some of the gray points during my presentation. Thank you so much again.
Great, thank you so much, Erdi. Fascinating stuff, and so much there to unpack. Before we hand over to our next speaker, I just wanted to remind our audience that As you think of questions that you'd like to put to our speakers, you can use the Q&A function from the Zoom controls to type your question into that box, and then we'll be posing a selection of those questions to our speakers at the conclusion of our session today. And so now I'd like to hand things over to Dr. Nukhet Sandal of Ohio University and thank her for joining us today. Nukhet, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for inviting me to this wonderful panel. And thank you very much, Erdi. This is really a wonderful opportunity to discuss this fascinating book. And I would like to join Peter in congratulating Erdi on this stellar contribution to not only religion and politics, like Erdi mentioned. This is an amazing contribution to multiple fields, and I have read it by now many times, different chapters from different angles, and it enriches the fields of Turkish politics, diaspora politics, foreign policy analysis, in addition to religion and politics. It is empirically very rich. I especially find the interviews and Erdi's access really impressive. And I highly recommend it to scholars of these multiple disciplines. So I'll try to keep my comments short and curb my enthusiasm a little bit to allow time for discussion and questions and answers. And I'll just mention a couple of things that I thought about when I was reading the book. First of all, there is this thing like Erdogan phenomenon in the Muslim world. It has always amazed me how Erdogan is widely admired by Muslims from various regions, ranging from Southeast Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa. I have had my share of curious conversations with various people, including ride-share drivers. When they find out that I'm from Turkey, all of a sudden they start raving about Erdogan and how he's doing a great job representing the Muslims. So, whether one likes his politics or not, he did fill a gap in the imaginations of many in the Muslim world. So in that sense, I think there is a lot of, there is a need in the field still to look at the dynamics of AK Party, the Turkish state, and Erdogan's influence in multiple regions. And the three cases Erdi looks at in his book, Northern Macedonia, Albania, and Bulgaria, are very critical cases. And I'm really glad that he landed on these three cases because of the multiple layers of history that these regions, countries have with Turkey. Thankfully, Erdi nicely provides a history in the beginning, which would help readers who do not have the background, historical background. But there is tremendous connection between these areas and the Turkish military and political elite as well, the establishment in the establishment years. And there's centuries of history. So these are not randomly selected cases. These are actually very difficult cases and important cases to look at. And Erdi does a fascinating job at investigating these multiple ties. So the book's main contribution, I think, of course, the book has many contributions, but to me, the viewing of domestic identity transformation with foreign policy initiatives stands out. Erdi describes the political identity change experienced by Turkey as a process of coercive ethno-nationalist Sunnification. And he describes how this Sunnification, in the process of this Sunnification, Diyanet, the religious affairs, was instrumentalized, especially in foreign policy making. I like that he brings up the political entrepreneurship of the Özal, Turgut Özal period and 1990s. So the use of religion itself or the relationships with the Balkans are not confined to the Erdogan period, of course. And the connection of domestic reactions and dynamics to foreign policy, to me, was really refreshing. For example, you cannot look at the reactions of Erdogan and AK Party to the famous Gezi protests independently of Arab uprisings. So Erdi does a great job of bringing these local dynamics together with the foreign policy and regional dynamics going on in the region. And he problematizes the religious soft power description of Turkey and calls it an ambiguous actor with ambivalent religious soft power. And yes, I mean, it's a difficult balance. There is some soft power going on, but it's not just a soft power. It comes with different interests, different identities, and a hard power element. And there is definitely a very strong desire on the AK Party side to use religious symbolism and influence and to sometimes dominate the discourse, religious and political discourse in the Balkans. The building of the Great Mosque of Tirana, that was constructed by Turkey, but by the Diyanet as the biggest mosque in the Balkans, is one example of this. Like, you know, if there is a religious discourse, we are the ones who will set the terms of this, and Turkey will construct the biggest mosque. And there is this, you see the desire to be really dominant in the politics of religion in this area. Also, unsurprisingly, because of my own interest, I was fascinated by the epistemic community aspect of things. How do you identify new areas of thinking and expertise in the making of foreign policy or in the making of new legal frameworks? I was telling Peter and Erdi that I have recently read a book called Separate but Faithful by Amanda Hollis-Brodsky and Joshua Wilson, where they look at the institutions the Christian right uses to transform the legal culture in the United States. So they look at like how there is a new epistemic community emerging in that legal framework that has the goal of transforming the terms of the debate. And when I read Erdi's book, I also see similar dynamics. There is a new generation of diplomatic corps, which is very different from 1990s and early 2000s. You have people coming from the famous Imam Hatip background. Imam Hatips are the religious schools in Turkey, which were initially established to educate the religious elite and the imams, but later they became mainstream. And right now we have a political elite who are coming from that background. And their terms of engagement are very different. And they are transforming the terms of the debate when they are engaging in diplomacy and sometimes conflict resolution in other contexts. So this is, and now we have an entire policy elite who's coming from these institutions in Turkey. Their outlook and goals are heavily informed by that background. And Erdi mentions that in his book, and he looks into some of the new dynamics and tensions this type of approach and this type of these communities of practice, communities of discourse, or epistemic communities creates in these three cases. So without further ado, I have three questions, which if time permits, I would love to discuss with Erdi and the audience. The first one is that despite everything, we see a level of pragmatism, of course, in Erdogan's foreign policy. So I think it was Barış Keskin who wrote about how his discourse in the country differs from how he deals with events outside and his interactions with other political leaders. We also do not hear about all Muslims from Erdogan. For example, he has been notoriously quiet about Uyghurs and China, which makes me think that his goals are more about regional dominance than a global discourse on Muslims. And he does intend to have strong relations with China. We know that too. So which makes me think, what is his end goal outside of the religion aspect? Yes, we know the religious part and his desire to use Islam as an instrument in influencing other countries, populations and communities. But there is something more there, and I would love to have a quick discussion on that. Also, now in the Turkish political landscape, we have many alternative parties that are coming from the more or less the same religious background, right? So there is this diversification of the political landscape, especially Ahmet Davutoğlu's Gelecek Partisi, and Ahmet Davutoğlu is a core name creating the initial foreign policy initiatives of AK Party. And Ali Babacan's Deva Partisi, for example. How will that political competition affect the foreign policies. I mean, we already see the tensions with the Boğaziçi case between Deva Partisi and AK Party. And it is really a fascinating moment to think about, like, how will this, since again, these parties are politically conservative, relatively coming from the AK Party background. So things are changing, and what should we expect? Will that affect foreign policy at some point? And also, after the coup attempt, there was of course, there was a crackdown on Gülen institutions, not only in Turkey, but also abroad. Erdi has some really fascinating interviews and snapshots about that conflict tensions, how the Muslim communities of these three countries, the three cases, deal with this war, in Erdi's terms. So I wonder how the Turkish diaspora that was part of the Gülen movement will transform their institutions and goals in long term. We are talking about a very big community and a pretty well-networked community. And I do not see them giving up on their own outreach and foreign policy in long term. So what do we expect? What are they going to do under the situation? So, and I will end my introductory remarks with the million-dollar question: what is after Erdogan? Like, do you expect like these initiatives and this really aggressive use of Diyanet will continue after Erdogan? This has now changed, transformed the political landscape, foreign policy landscape so much that there are some embedded values, or do you see a potential for change? And when I say change, I don't know towards which direction, but I would love to hear how long-lasting you think some of these transformations will be. Thank you very much. And again, Erdi, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to be the discussant in this conversation. I truly enjoyed reading the book 4 or 5 times by now. And every time I read it, my attention goes to a different quote, so it keeps giving intellectually. So I really appreciate all your hard work and this wonderful contribution.
Nükhet, I owe you a big thank, because not only you gave me like lots of feedbacks during the PhD dissertations, but also helped me putting some subtitles and the titles for the book. I'm one of the most terrible person like writing the titles, and Nükhet is one of the the angel for helping all of these stuff. Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you so much, Nükhet. Very, very rich set of comments and such an intriguing final question about the post-Erdogan period. So we already have several questions that have come in, but I actually would like to give Erdi a few minutes to respond to the questions that Nükhet raised. So those of you in the audience, you have a couple more minutes to think of your questions and write them into the Q&A box. And in the meantime, Erdi, if you'd like to respond to any of the questions that Nükhet raised, please go ahead.
Let me go very quickly because I can see the questions as well. I mean, the Erdogan phenomena, which is true, you know, I mean, whenever I've been living in Europe around 10 years, and I lived in the Balkans around 4 years. And whenever you go some Muslim neighborhoods, Muslim streets, you can see the real presence and the kind of an Erdogan image in the mind of the Muslims in Europe and in the Balkans at the same time. This is not only because Erdogan's huge investments or the personalization of state using the religious apparatus and religious communities. They are the unofficial apparatuses or the epistemic communities of Turkey, which has been energized, particularly after 2013. The other reality is that there is a huge lack of interaction, or like there is a problematic state orientation in the Southeast Europe and the Western Europe regarding the Muslims. They are coming mostly from lower class. They can't reach the political resources. They can't reach the economic resources. And Erdogan and his team has realized all of these issues quite cleverly. Yes, there is a pragmatic side, as you noted, this is true, but at the same time, Erdogan is not the political actor who went to the Balkans after his prime ministry period. There are many stories about Erdogan's presence in the Balkans and in the activities in mid-1990s, even before his mayorship. He knows the region very well. He knows every single actor. For example, since 2002, he has been working one particular advisor, whose name is Sabri Demir, coming a very Muslim Albanian background. He can speak all the languages in the region. He knows every actor, and Erdogan is working with him. None of the other actors are doing all of these stuff before Erdogan. So there is a reality. Yes, there is a pragmatism, but at the same time, we should be very precise about that. I'm using this term a lot, but I would like to use one more time. In an Aristotelian meaning, Erdogan is a political animal. He has been in politics since he's 15 years old. And when we make a very simple calculation, Joe Biden and Recep Tayyip Erdogan are the most experienced political actors in the globe right now. So he knows every single stage of politics, and he knows how to use some of the political discourses as a boomerang effect. This is what you mentioned about the China, and the Uyghur Muslims and Erdogan's reactions. Yes, there is one Erdogan that we can listen from TVs, we can read from newspapers, but also Erdogan has many different state apparatus and unofficial apparatus. They've been walking in the regions. So their activities and Erdogan's discourse are quite different. So in the fieldwork, you can easily observe these points in the Balkans. The other thing is that what I would like to say about this Imam Hatip generation, the neo-epistemic community, whether they can transform Turkey's foreign policy behaviors or not. Turkey is a very big ship, and I had the chance to talk with the previous head of Diyanet, Mehmet Görmez, in 2016. And also anonymously, I told every single ambassador of Turkey in the Balkans and the previous ones. You can see the differences, the Diyanet staff in the region, in the headquarters, the diplomats coming from a diplomatic route, and the diplomatic staff coming from a religious background or coming from the political party directly. I think Turkey is Islamist, has some fundamental issue. I think Peter will also make some comments about it when we compare the Muslim Brotherhood or other Islamic groups all around the world. This National Outlook movement and today's Justice and Development Party do not have enough intellectual experience, intellectual ability to transform one country's direction from another side. This is why there are still in every critical junction, Erdogan trying to be an exceptional leader, trying to use the overdose of Islam, so on and so forth. And this is the main reasons why they created a desire, interest-based unofficial coalition with the Gülen movement. So I think it's a little bit early to say these Gülen movements, the epistemic committee. The last part is that alternative parties. I would like to show two photos to you from the book, if I can. I mean, this is the photo. I mean, this is black and white. This is the publisher's preferences. This is a poster of Erdogan after the constitutional referendum in the 16th of April 2017. I was in Skopje, and you can't believe that how Macedonian Muslims celebrated Erdogan's victory. And when I talked with them, they saw that this is not a celebration for Turkey. This is a celebration for Islam, because unofficial coalition, unofficial apparatus of Turkey using and making a propaganda as if Erdogan is the only true Muslim leader. This is the second photo. This is one of the religious communities lecture. These are the Davutoğlu's terms in his favorite books, Strategic Depth. This photo taken in 2017, just 6 or 8 months later after Davutoğlu resigned as prime minister. 2 years later, I went to the same place. There wasn't any single Davutoğlu book anymore in the place. So the hegemony is not limited in the domestic parts, parts of Turkey. The last point is that, I mean, what would happen after Erdogan? It's a very difficult question. When you talk with the Balkan Muslims or the Balkan elites, they count like 3 different leaders. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, for sure, Özal, and Erdogan. And Erdogan has been in the region more than 30 years. So it would be very difficult to delete his all remarks in the region. But still, I think any leader, any political actor would like to use Turkey's very influential, very hegemonic transnational apparatus in the region. But if one particular leader or a political group can use all of these institutions in a reasonable way, not using, like, I think Turkey should use religion to create an influence in the region, but overdose use of religion, pushing the boundaries or reaching the other side of the boundaries will create some other tensions. So there is a very fragile balance regarding this using issue. Yes, it should be used, but how? This is the big question. And after Erdogan, I really would like to know that question. I mean, many people ask me years and years, what's going to be happen after Gülen? My answer was quite simple. I don't know. And what's going to happen after Erdogan? I really don't know. We're going to see.
Okay, thanks so much, Erdi. So I want to put out a final call for questions now. I think we're going to be, with the time we have available, a little hard pressed to get through the ones that have already come in, but let's go ahead and start. And I'd like to pose these questions to both Nükhet and Erdi to respond as you see fit. So Antonios Paparizos has asked several questions. I'll choose one of them. Where he asks, what is most important for the unity of the state in Turkey? State nationalism or the different Islamic religions? Maybe an opportunity to talk a little bit about the relationship between Islam and nationalism in Turkey. I'll throw out actually, why don't we start with that one, because the next two questions I'm going to ask are a little bit related to each other and maybe work together quite well. So I'll open that up to either or both of you who'd like to respond.
Nükhet?
No, you can start. You are the start.
Okay, thank you. I mean, before starting that, whether religion or nationalism, let me say one more thing regarding Nükhet's comments of these big mosques. I think Turkey's current time should also explore some of the psychoanalysis, or should have a joint research regarding psychology and political science, because this big mosque issue is not only limited in the Balkans. Not now with our common colleague Egdunas Ruktas, with Peter, we've been working some other papers regarding to the Eastern Europe, and Erdogan has been building the biggest mosque of the Eastern Europe in Latvia right now. And if I'm not mistaken, the Maryland Mosque is one of the biggest mosques in the North America. So being biggest, being visible is something different. We should scrutinize regarding Erdogan's personality and the political attitudes. This is the first point. The second point is that this using religion and nationalism is not a newly emerged issue in the history of the contemporary Turkey. Even in the period of Mustafa Kemal, when you read the constitutional documents, when you read the parliamentary discussions, and when you read the declaration, the Nutuk of Atatürk, the proper Turkish citizen has been defined as being Turk and being Muslim, but being a Muslim is very much defined by the state. Now, the state has been controlling another mindsets, and these two issues, religion and nationalism, still working together. Previously, it was a nationalistic religious issue, but right now, today, there is a religious nationalism. And after 1980s coup, there were 5 different coups in the Turkish history, so it's hard to remember the dates sometimes. There was a political ideology of the military junta being created. This is the Turkish Islamic synthesis. Now Turkey is still in another synthesis. This is not Turkish Islamic synthesis. This is an Islamic Turkish synthesis. So if you would like to be defined as a proper Turkish citizen under the Erdogan regime, you should define yourself as Turk. You should define yourself as Muslim, but not Alevi or any other sects. You should define yourself as a Sunni Muslim. But what kind of Sunni? Not being a member of Furkan Foundation, not being a member of Gülen movement, like the frame, the territories are quite strict about your religiosity and about your nationality or about your nationalism. So both is the main components of being a proper Turk and creating a unification. But this unification also has been creating a huge divisions within the Turkish society. But what we know that from the latest surveys, there's an increasing deism, there's an increasing atheism in the Turkish society. So this kind of thesis has been creating a different antithesis as always happened.
And just to add really quickly to Erdi's point, there is a sort of Turkish exceptionalism to everything Muslim and Islamic that the AK Party is using. And there is this understanding in the establishment discourse as like Turkey is qualified to lead the Islamic world much more strongly than Arabs, Iranians, or other communities. So I would say that whatever you look at, you will see a very strong nationalist tinge. This was the case with Gülen movement. Of course, actually, I think for Gülen movement, it came even first with all the Turkish language and culture initiatives. But even in Erdogan's discourse, you see that type of neo-Ottoman understanding of Turks leading. And there is that, it's not just like us Muslims devoid of national identities. There is, you will see a very distinct Turkish exceptionalism in all this discourse.
Okay, thank you very much to both Erdi and Nukhet for that response. So our next question comes from Hakan Kerutu, who thanks both speakers and then says and asks, why couldn't other Turkish leaders not use the same power potential in the Balkans? Why did it coincide only with Erdogan's period of rule?
I think the answer is quite simple. Balkans were not the same. Turkey was not the same. Balkans, I mean, before 1990s and particularly before the Bosnian War, Balkans were in a fragile position in Yugoslavia. The world wasn't the same actually under the Cold War periods. And the Turkish, and this is the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, before Erdogan, between, if I'm not mistaken, I use it not in my book, but in one of my articles, between 1970s to 1970s to 2002, Turkey was governed more than 30 different coalition governments, and the maximum period of one prime minister is 11 months. So within 11 months, in a Turkey, in a very giant country, you should first stabilize your chair at home, and then you will react to outside. And the Balkans wasn't in a priority position for Turkey before Erdogan, because Turkey is very, not problematic, but still very issue full of relations with Europe, with the United States, and Turkey has many different issues inside its territories. But in the Erdogan's period, they realized that they are in a government position, they can stay in a longer period, and they captured all the institutions. And the conflict between different power groups are not, yes, they were very intense, but at the end of the day, particularly after 2010, until the beginning of the war between Gülen and Erdogan, they reached a certain level of stability and they focused to the Balkans. The last point is very much related with economy. Even though, I mean, with not that much, with a little bit amount of money, you can do many different things in the Balkans. But when I talk with the representatives of the Muslim offices or the Diyanets of the Balkans, what I realized that they described 1990s Turkey as a poor and not eligible to support them financially. But right now, Turkey state, despite of every economic fragility, one way or another, trying to find to support the Muslim communities, Muslim components, and the Muslim institutions legally or directly or indirectly, not only by state sense, but also some other institutions or religious communities or some companies support. That is why one more point that I mentioned in the book, the neo-patrimonialism and the clientelist approach of the current Turkish states help a lot to support the Balkan Muslims in various ways.
Great. Nukhet, did you want to add anything to that?
I'm good.
Okay, great. So our next question comes from Jivan Aslandas, who says, speaking of Turkey's transnational politics with respect to Turkish diaspora and other Muslim communities, what are the similarities and differences between the aims and orientation of its external politics applied to Europe, especially Germany, when compared to the Balkans, especially toward Muslim community in those subregions?
This is a quite a new subject for me that I've been working right now under my Marie Curie Fellowship, but my wife, Associate Professor Bahar Bashar, working about diaspora. So I read a lot about and listened about a lot about her studies. What I know from the literature at the same time, first of all, diaspora and kin politics are two different issues. And in the Southeast Europe, until the coup attempt, we didn't see any diasporas. They were kin and the neighbors of Turkey, coming from same cultural, religious history and the religion backgrounds. This is something different than the diaspora politics. But if I'm not mistaken, in 2014, with one of the famous speeches of Davutoğlu argued that, quoting from Bahar's one of the article right now, argued that we have been changing the definition of diaspora. Today, for Turkey, diaspora means the Muslims in Somalia, the Turks in South Asia, the Turks or the Turkic originated individuals in Europe and in the Southeast Europe. So they enlarged the definition of diaspora, and also they establish new institutions and new offices to reach them. What is the main purpose of reaching all of these issues? The first thing is that by doing that, Erdogan and this regime creating a global audience. For example, whenever you go any kind of mosques in Bulgaria or any Turkish-oriented mosque or Muslim neighborhood, even in the United Kingdom, you can see some of the Turkish brochures, booklets, or propaganda tools. They've been making a propaganda for the current regime's purposes, whether they're legitimate or not. So this creating a kind of a global audience. The second thing is that, there is indeed a pragmatism. There is also objective and instrumentalization use of all of these apparatus. But for example, Erdogan tried to make in 2018, I think, tried to make a big meeting in Germany, but the German state didn't let to make them. He managed to do it in Bosnia and get a huge crowd and a huge support. So this image also using for domestic politics at the same time. Our leader, our true Muslim leader, is the biggest leader in the world, and you can see this demonstration, this meeting is a reflection of this bigness. And one last photo from the book. This is the pizza shop from Albanian Durrës. The pizza shop name is Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The owner is a Wahhabi. When I went to that pizza shop, and after eating a couple of slices, I would be frank about this issue. I reached a chance to talk to the owner, and I asked that, you're a Wahhabi coming from a different religious background, different culture, even different language. What is your, and there is a conflict between your country and the Erdogan's regime. What is the main purpose? Why you have been putting some other country's leader in your shop, in your only business? And he told me that, my friend, you can't understand me, but Erdogan is the only leader who has been holding Islamic flag, but wearing tie and suits like the Western political actor. If someone needs to fight for us, for Muslims, this is the only person, Erdogan. So this was the reaction. So all of these diaspora or using Islam or Islamic institutions outside Turkey's territories is serving many different aims. So this is one of these aims, actually.
Again, just to quickly add to Erdi's point, you see that there is a battle for the hearts and minds of the Muslims in various regions. And it will also be really interesting to observe how the states, European states or the Balkan states, deal with this issue. Like when an outside actor comes for your citizens with these goals, how do you, and we have already seen the attempts of France and Germany to create a type of Islam that is compatible with the German values or European values. So to me, it is from outside, it's really interesting to observe these dynamics and the desire of the state, European state, to compete with these outside actors when it comes to hearts and minds of their Muslim populations.
But one point, Niket, if you don't mind, the reactions of the European countries is not related regarding to the nature of religion, is not related to the moral values of religion. It's about the sovereignty and the power, because they realize that the religion is not only a religion, and they would like to capture that field. But from my reading right now, they're too late for that.
Great, thank you. So one more question from the audience, and then one final question for me, both of which I think work very nicely with the line of discussion that we're on right now. So Rutsmir Sadic extends greetings from Bosnia and Herzegovina and asks, in your opinion, does Turkey support the work of religious institutions and the strengthening of religion, Islam namely, in the public sphere in the Balkans to strengthen its influence and neo-Ottoman spirit in the countries where it once ruled? Or does it support the strengthening of religious institutions because it wants to strengthen the role of Islam? In other words, does Turkey in certain instances work for supranational interests? Then the question I wanted to ask you is very much related to the point you raised about the Wahhabi pizza owner. Obviously, another country whose transnational religious influences we talk about quite a lot is Saudi Arabia, mainly in connection with this idea of the export of Wahhabism over the last few decades, funded by billions of petrodollars. And so I wanted to ask Erdi whether in your research you came across evidence or examples or expressions of Saudi religious influence in these same countries, and how would you compare and contrast the approaches and strategies that you saw in the Saudi case with what Turkey was doing?
Thanks, Peter. Let me start with this neo-Ottomanism question. I think in the book I discussed it as well. This concept of neo-Ottomanism is quite problematic because as a Turkish citizen, I think Nükhet will share the same idea with you. Every single Turkish citizen has a kind of a Ottoman image in its mind, in their minds, and everyone has a different kind of a neo-Ottomanism in their minds. I mean, the Özal has a kind of a neo-Ottomanism, Atatürk has a kind of a neo-Ottomanism, and Erdogan has its neo-Ottomanism. So, but the problem is that what kind of Ottomanism that we've been talking? I mean, the Ottoman history is pretty much 6 centuries, and when you the production of all of these policies, on the one hand, Erdogan has very good relations with the Balkan and the Balkan Muslim components. At the same time, all of these policies has been producing in Ankara. And Ankara's lenses, Ankara's visions, and the Balkans reading Ottomans are quite different. For example, I use that these two regions sharing the same history. No, they're not sharing the same history. They are sharing the same past and reading the history quite differently. So bombarding the neo-Ottomanism idea wouldn't be a very useful tool for Turkey to create a general audience or an influence in the Balkans. And using that religion, if the glorious times of the Ottoman Empire is the term of the Abdülhamit II, yes, this is very good point. But the Abdülhamit II is not a big figure in the Balkans. The Kanuni or the conqueror Mehmet is the big figures. So Erdogan is doing a kind of a neo-Ottomanism, but referring the wrong time period of Ottoman history in the Balkans. This is my policy advice to the Turkish government if we have an audience about this point. This is my remark about this question. I mean, Peter, I know this is your field, but now I'm working at another paper with one of my other co-authors regarding comparing the Saudi and the Turkey influence. There is a huge visibility of the Saudi influence, some particular areas such as Sanjak region in Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. But even though the states try to block the Saudi effect because they found the Saudi effect a kind of an orthodox related with terrorism. They saw it as a security problem, security issue, but at the same time, the economic capital of the Saudis are quite big, so they can reach different circles, different lines, and also they've been using some different blinders to hide their interests. I mean, opening the shopping malls, not mosques directly, opening not Quran courses, but the culture centers, so on and so forth. So there is a competition. But at the same time, in terms of understanding of Islam, language, and reaching the individuals and the communities, still Turkey is the biggest actor in the region, but we shouldn't underestimate Saudi and Iranian impact in the region, it seems that most of the rivalry discourse regarding this, who's going to be the leader of the global ummah, mostly focusing on the Western Europe, but the war or the rivalry has been ongoing in the Southeast Europe as well. And Bosnia and the Sanjak regions are the battlefield for all of these issues. And when you walk through the streets of Sanjak or Bosnia, you can see the headscarf styles or the praying practice differences of the Muslims. They've been getting very much close to the Wahhabi style.
Okay, thank you. Nukhet, any final reflections or thoughts from you before we wrap
I think
up?
Erdi said it all.
Okay, well then, I think we've reached the end of our time today. And I want to first and foremost thank both of our speakers for joining us and provoking such a rich and engaging discussion. If today's event has you looking for more on the intersection of religion and foreign policy, I wanted to make you all aware that next month on Friday, March 12th at 12 p.m. Eastern, Professor Timothy A. Burns from Colgate University will be presenting on the papacy, past and present, religious soft power and international diplomacy. I've put a link in the chat box that will allow you to learn more about that event and to register to attend. My thanks as always to Ruth Gopin, who coordinates all of our events here at the Berkeley Center, and all the rest of the Center staff for making these sessions possible. Finally, let me join the Berkeley Center's Director and Managing Director, Sean Casey, and Michael Kessler in thanking you all for joining us today. Take care and hope to see you all at another of our events soon. Bye, everyone.